What if I told you that one of Europe's most conquered, colonized, and divided lands is also one of its oldest, richest, and most resilient cultures? Ireland, an island settled by Stone Age wanderers, shaped by Celts, transformed by monks, invaded by Vikings, reforged by Normans, conquered by empires, and split by politics, has survived every wave of history thrown at it. But how did this small island create a global identity, influence nations far beyond its shores, and emerge from centuries of conflict with a culture the world recognizes instantly? This is the epic, turbulent, and astonishing story of Ireland, 12,000 years in the making.
Prehistoric Ireland. Most people can locate the island of Ireland on a map, but far fewer can explain how its long and traumatic past shaped the nation we know today. Long before borders, kingdoms, or written records, Ireland's story began with its earliest human settlers, communities who lived in a world we can barely imagine, yet whose presence is still carved into the Irish landscape. When the first humans arrived in Ireland, the island had only just emerged from the final ice age. Exactly when these early settlers reached its shores remains debated, but archaeologists generally place their arrival somewhere around 10,000 years ago, during the Mesolithic period. These people lived simple but resourceful lives along rivers and coasts, crafting stone tools and moving with the seasons in small family groups. Although they left no written records, they left behind something far more durable: monuments of stone that still rise across Ireland today. As the Neolithic period dawned around 4000 BC, new farming communities began building enormous megalithic tombs, structures that required massive manpower, organization, and a shared culture. Sites such as Newgrange, Noath, and Douth were constructed with astonishing precision, often aligned with astronomical events such as the winter solstice sunrise. These Neolithic builders likely didn't think of themselves as Irish or as members of any nation, but their stone monuments stand as some of the oldest and most spectacular in Europe, marking the island as a place where human communities were already complex, spiritual, and deeply rooted in the land thousands of years before recorded history. Following the Neolithic Age came the Bronze Age and later the Iron Age, periods that saw the introduction of metalworking, improved tools, and more defined social structures. The people of Ireland traded, farmed, raised livestock, and created elaborate ritual sites. The landscape filled with hill forts, burial mounds, stone circles, and sacred places whose original meanings remain mysterious. But while these prehistoric societies shaped Ireland's landscape and identity, another force would soon arrive that left an even deeper cultural legacy, one that still defines the island's language, mythology, and sense of self. That force was the Celts.
Celtic and Gaelic Ireland. By the dawn of the Iron Age, new cultural influences were spreading across Europe. Ideas, languages, and technologies carried not by a single conquering army, but by many interconnected peoples. Among them were the Celts, whose cultural traditions eventually took root across much of Europe. Ireland was one of the lands where this Celtic presence became especially deep and enduring. Exactly how the Celts arrived in Ireland remains debated. Some historians suggest large-scale migrations, while others believe smaller groups influence local societies through trade, intermarriage, and the sharing of cultural practices. Whatever the mechanism, by around the first millennium BC, Ireland had become a distinctly Gaelic society, a branch of Celtic culture with its own language, customs, and mythic traditions. This period gave rise to the Ireland found in its oldest legends. Kings, warriors, poets, druids, and gods populate the tales of the mythological cycle, Ulster cycle, and Fenian cycle. These stories weren't mere entertainment. They preserved social values, explained the world, and celebrated ideals of heroism, honor, and kinship. Characters like Cuchulainn and Finian Mac Cumhal became cultural touchstones, passed from generation to generation through oral tradition. Gaelic Ireland was organized not as a unified kingdom, but as a mosaic of small, shifting territories called tuatha. Each tuath had its own king or chieftain, chosen from noble lineages. Society was hierarchical, yet surprisingly fluid, with status often determined by skill, wealth, or patronage rather than rigid birthright alone. At the top of this social system were the Fili, poets, and druids, learned advisors. In a world without writing, they held immense authority. They memorized laws, genealogies, and stories, serving as scholars, judges, and keepers of tradition. Their knowledge ensured continuity across generations and preserved a rich intellectual culture long before books were written in Ireland. But despite its internal richness, Ireland was still a largely isolated island on the fringes of Europe, until a new faith crossed the sea and transformed the island's identity. This transformation began with the arrival of Christianity, which ushered in an age of profound cultural flowering.
Early Christianity, c. 400 to 800 CE. Ireland's next great transformation comes not from conquerors or armies, but from ideas. Around the early 5th century, the island sits outside the borders of the Roman Empire, untouched by its legions, yet influenced by its trade routes. Across the sea, a new faith, Christianity, is spreading through Britain and the remnants of Rome, and soon it will cross the waters into Ireland. According to tradition, the figure who embodies this moment is Patrick. Born somewhere in Roman Britain, possibly Wales or Western England, he is kidnapped as a teenager by Irish raiders and sold into slavery. For 6 years, he tends flocks on the cold hillsides of the north until he escapes and returns home. But Patrick feels a calling, an inner voice urging him to return to the land of his captors, not for vengeance, but for mission. Around 432 CE, Patrick returns to Ireland as a Christian bishop, and over the next decades, something remarkable happens. Ireland gradually converts, largely without war or bloodshed. Instead of toppling kings, Patrick and other missionaries adapt to the island's tribal reality. They work through clan leaders, build relationships, and blend Christian symbols with familiar cultural ideas. In a world where most conversions occur at the tip of an imperial sword, Ireland's is organic, negotiated, and often peaceful. With Christianity comes literacy. In a land with no Roman cities, no imperial bureaucracy, and no written native language, monasteries arise as new centers of life. Places like Clonmacnoise, Kells, and Glendalough become hubs of learning where monks copy the Bible by candlelight, preserve ancient texts, and create spectacular illuminated manuscripts, the most famous being the Book of Kells, a masterpiece of color, symbolism, and craft. These monasteries are not just religious centers, they are engines of culture and innovation. They preserve Latin learning during a time when much of Europe is descending into chaos after the fall of Rome. Irish monks travel across the continent as missionaries and scholars, founding monasteries in Scotland, England, and even deep into the heart of Europe. For a time, Ireland becomes known as the Island of Saints and Scholars. A new Irish identity begins to emerge, a fusion of Celtic tradition and Christian spirituality. The ancient oral culture now joins with written manuscripts. Pagan symbols intertwine with Christian art. Tribal loyalties remain, but the island shares, perhaps for the first time, a common religious and intellectual world. But even at its height, this golden age carries the seeds of vulnerability. Monasteries store wealth, artwork, manuscripts, metalwork, and livestock. They cluster along riverbanks and coasts, and their ringing bells, echoing across the early medieval landscape, can be heard by more than just the faithful. Beyond the horizon, new sails are appearing, and they belong to a people who see Ireland not as a spiritual land, but as a place ripe for plunder.
Viking Age Ireland, 795 to 1014 CE. The end of Ireland's Golden Age arrives suddenly, announced not by kings or armies, but by the distant splash of oars. In the year 795, longships land on the island's northern shores. The raiders come from Scandinavia, warriors who the Irish will call Lochlanach, Vikings. They strike with terrifying speed. Monasteries are burned, treasures seized, monks killed or enslaved. For communities accustomed to peaceful religious life, the attacks feel like thunder from a clear sky. Over the next decades, Vikings return again and again. Ireland's coastline, rich with monasteries and river mouths, becomes a magnet for raids. Places like Lambay, Inishmurray, and Iona suffer repeated attacks. The Irish annals record these moments with stark anguish, the burning of all the churches of Ireland. A poetic exaggeration, but one that captures the shock of a society suddenly exposed. Yet the Viking Age in Ireland becomes far more complex than plunder. By the mid-9th century, Viking groups begin to settle. They establish longforts, fortified ship camps along major rivers. These camps grow into the first true urban centers in Irish history. Names like Dublin, Limerick, Waterford, Wexford, and Cork, cities that today define Ireland, are born from these Norse foundations. For a people without cities, Ireland is suddenly urbanizing. Trade flourishes, silver from the Islamic world, silk from the East, and goods from across Europe begin passing through Viking Irish ports. A hybrid society emerges. Norse warriors marrying into Gaelic families, adopting the Irish language, even as they bring new crafts, shipbuilding techniques, and cosmopolitan networks. But the blending of cultures does not erase conflict. Irish kings continue fighting both each other and the Vikings, sometimes allying with one Norse group to crush another. The island remains a patchwork of competing dynasties, Uiniel in the north, Munster kings in the south, and rising coastal powers tied to Viking towns. Into this fractured landscape steps a new figure, Bryden Boru, a king from Munster whose ambition extends beyond his province. Through diplomacy, warfare, and sheer persistence, he rises to become the most powerful ruler in Ireland. By the early 11th century, he dominates the island, extracting tribute from local kings and asserting a claim to high kingship unprecedented in strength. His greatest test comes in 1014 at the Battle of Clontarf near Dublin.
The clash pits Brian's forces against a coalition of Dublin Norse, Leinster rebels, and Viking mercenaries. The battle is brutal. Brian's army emerges victorious, and the power of Viking Dublin is broken. But Brian himself is killed in his tent, and his dream of unifying Ireland dies with him. The battle does not end Viking presence. Norse towns remain central to Irish life, but it ends their political dominance. Over time, Viking settlers become thoroughly integrated, part of the island's evolving tapestry. The Viking Age leaves Ireland changed forever. Urban life has begun. Trade networks now tie the island to the wider world. Cultures have mingled, setting the stage for future complexities. But new storms are forming across the Irish Sea. And the next wave of transformation will not be sailors seeking silver, but knights seeking land, power, and dominion.
The Norman Invasion, 1169 to 1300. By the mid-12th century, Ireland is a land of powerful regional kings, monastic wealth, and vibrant Norse Gaelic towns. But it is also a land divided, fragmented by constant rivalries between clans and kingdoms. No ruler has fully united the island since Brian Boru, and shifting alliances create both opportunity and danger. One of those dangers begins with a single exiled king. His name is Diarmait mac Murchada, the ambitious and controversial King of Leinster. After losing his throne in a bitter conflict, Diarmait flees Ireland in 1166 and seeks aid from an unlikely source, King Henry II of England, whose expanding Angevin empire stretches from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. Henry permits Diarmait to recruit Norman knights, elite warriors from Wales and England, whose military skill is unmatched in Western Europe. These men come not only for loyalty, but for promises of land, wealth, and power in Ireland. In 1169, the Normans land on Irish shores. They arrive in small numbers, but their impact is seismic. Heavily armored, disciplined, and mounted on war horses, they overwhelm Irish forces accustomed to lighter, faster warfare. Within months, they retake Leinster for Diarmait. And they do not stop. Wexford falls, Waterford falls, and then Dublin, captured in a stunning assault. Ireland's political map shatters almost overnight. Some Gaelic kings resist fiercely, others ally with the invaders to weaken their rivals. Within a few years, Norman lords carve out vast territories, lordships, fortifying them with stone castles, new towns, and feudal law. A new social structure begins to rise on the island. But the Normans' rapid success alarms Henry II. Fearing that his ambitious knights might create an independent kingdom beyond his control, he sails to Ireland in 1171, the first reigning English king to set foot on Irish soil. His arrival asserts royal authority and begins centuries of English involvement in Irish affairs. Over time, the Normans settle deeply into Irish life. They intermarry with Gaelic families, adapt to the Irish language, and merge traditions. Many become known as more Irish than the Irish themselves. Their castles stand beside Gaelic ring forts. Their laws operate beside Brehon traditions. In towns, English, French, Norse, and Gaelic cultures mix into something entirely new. Yet this blending also breeds tension. The English crown grows uneasy with the cultural assimilation of its settlers. A series of attempts to control and re-Anglicize them, most famously the Statutes of Kilkenny in 1366, tried to forbid English settlers from speaking Irish, marrying Irish, or following Irish customs. But on the ground, these rules are nearly impossible to enforce. By 1300, Ireland is a hybrid landscape. The Pale, around Dublin, remains firmly under English control. Powerful Norman-Irish dynasties dominate elsewhere: Burke, Fitzgerald, Butler. Gaelic kingdoms endure in the west and north, resilient and vibrant. No one group fully controls the island. But the arrival of the Normans marks a turning point. Ireland has become entangled with England, politically, culturally, and militarily, in ways that will shape the next 800 years. And as the medieval world shifts, Ireland is heading toward a new chapter, one defined by conquest, colonization, and resistance.
The Tudor Conquest, 1530 to 1603. By the early 16th century, Ireland is a patchwork of powers: Gaelic clans in the west and north, old Norman-Irish lordships across the island, and a small but strong English-controlled zone around Dublin known as the Pale. For centuries, England's grip on Ireland has appeared firm in theory, but uneven in reality. All of that is about to change. Across the Irish Sea, the Tudor dynasty is transforming England into a centralized, assertive, and increasingly powerful state. Monarchs like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I are determined not just to influence Ireland, but to control it outright. The age of medieval alliances and negotiated autonomy is ending. The age of centralized conquest is beginning. Henry VIII, rewriting the relationship. In 1541, Henry VIII declares himself King of Ireland, replacing the old title, Lord of Ireland. The goal is clear: unify the island under the crown, eliminate semi-independent lordships, and tighten English authority. The policy known as surrender and re-grant tries to reshape Irish society. Gaelic and Norman lords must surrender their lands to the king, receive them back as English-style nobles, and pledge loyalty to the crown. Some accept, others resist. Most simply adapt on the surface while maintaining traditional power behind the scenes. But beneath this political maneuvering, something far bigger is unfolding. The Reformation reaches Ireland. When England breaks from the Catholic Church, it unintentionally widens the divide with Ireland. English rulers become Protestant. The vast majority of Irish people, Gaelic and Norman alike, remain Catholic. What had once been a political issue now gains a powerful religious dimension. Identity becomes tied to faith. Loyalty becomes suspect. Tensions sharpen. The rise of resistance. As the Tudor state pushes deeper into the island, local conflicts flare. But the real test comes in the second half of the century with a series of large-scale rebellions, most famously the Desmond Rebellions in Munster and the 9 Years' War in Ulster. The leaders of this final, desperate stand are two powerful Gaelic nobles, Hugh O'Neill and Hugh Roe O'Donnell. They build alliances, rally clans, and seek aid from Catholic Europe. Their goal is nothing less than stopping the English advance and preserving Gaelic autonomy. For a time, it works. The Irish win major victories, even threatening English control of the island. But the Tudor war machine is relentless. Elizabeth I intensifies the conquest. Under Elizabeth's rule, campaigns in Ireland become brutal. Scorched earth tactics burn crops, destroy livestock, and starve populations. Entire regions are devastated. Warfare that once followed Gaelic codes is replaced by total strategic domination. The turning point comes in 1601, the Battle of Kinsale.
Spanish allies land in the south, but coordination fails. English forces defeat the combined Irish-Spanish army, breaking the last unified resistance. In 1603, O'Neill submits. The Gaelic order collapses. The Tudor conquest is complete. A changed Ireland. By the time the Tudors are finished, Ireland has been transformed. English law replaces Gaelic custom. Old lordships lose autonomy. Catholic Ireland finds itself ruled by a Protestant English state. Land hunger grows in England, laying the groundwork for future plantations. The defeat of the Gaelic lords ends 1,000 years of independent Irish power. And yet, even as the Tudor conquest concludes, another seismic change is already underway, one that will uproot entire populations, redraw the landscape, and shape centuries of conflict. Ireland is entering the age of plantation.
Ireland's story is one of resilience, an island shaped not just by the tides of conquest, migration, and empire, but by an extraordinary ability to endure, adapt, and remake itself. From the first hunter-gatherers crossing ancient land bridges, to the rise of Celtic culture and the brilliance of medieval monasteries, to the arrival of Vikings, Normans, Tudors, and the forces of empire, the island has absorbed wave after wave of change, yet never lost its sense of identity. Its history is scarred by conflict, plantations, famines, rebellions, civil war, and political division. But it is also marked by creativity, scholarship, and cultural strength. A land where music, language, and storytelling carried people through suffering. A place whose diaspora spread across the world, reshaping nations far beyond its shores. And in the modern era, Ireland has transformed again into a confident, independent state, a global economic hub, and a society that blends deep tradition with modern innovation. Northern Ireland, too, has journeyed from decades of violence toward a hard-won, still fragile peace, proving that even the deepest wounds can move toward healing. Today, Ireland is not defined by a single narrative, empire, or faith. It is defined by the people who have lived on this island for thousands of years: Gaelic, Viking, Norman, English, Ulster Scots, and countless others, each leaving their thread in the tapestry. The story of Ireland is not the story of what was taken, but of what survived. A nation that remembers its past, carries it forward, and continues to write new chapters with the same resilience that has guided it through every age.